This podcast was produced by Sean Weston Media.
Hello and welcome to episode 19 of the Media Will Eat Itself podcast. We're back for another series of interviews about how modern professional people work with modern media. What skills do we need to have these days? How has working with media changed over the years? And what do we have to look forward to? Today, I'm joined by multidisciplinary designer, creative thinker and content creator Will Chidlow. He specialises in digital solutions for other businesses as a freelance designer and videographer and a senior designer at Liquid Light based in Brighton. I first came across Will when I was doing some homework on microphones, and I often find that the best way to find out about tech stuff is on YouTube. I've wanted to invite a YouTuber onto the show for a while, and when I began to look into Will's background, I discovered that he's actually a man of many talents. In other words, the perfect guest. Enjoy the show. All right, Will, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, first of all, can you provide our listeners with a potted history of your career so far and actually where you studied?
Yeah, sure. So I was terribly unacademic as a young adult. I struggled a lot throughout my school, dyslexia, and generally felt that I just found the learning environment very difficult throughout my whole education. So as soon as I was 16, I did my GCSEs and I was straight out of the door, and never wanted to go back, basically. And because of my experience of education at that time, I considered that I was always going to go into something really practical. And growing up in the Midlands in the early 90s, you know, creative fields were a complete mystery to me. They were never something that I considered at all. And I went through a myriad of different practical jobs. At one point, I actually trained for 2.5 years as a butcher, working in a farm shop, which is crazy. I did shop fitting, window cleaning, factory work, everything. Lots of socialising as well, and generally just a bit of growing up. And then I moved down to Brighton on the south coast in 2005, and at that point I actually got a job working for a large energy provider, EDF Energy. Yep. So I was working in sales and marketing at that time in a call centre environment, and it was the first job really that I'd had that wasn't this kind of practical hands-on kind of vocational thing. And to be honest, it wasn't something I was particularly interested in. It was just something that paid me quite well. And
it was kind of that start, wasn't it? You needed to start.
It was. And I was there for I think I was there for about 7 years in total, worked my way up into management. And eventually I ended up working on a live chat team. Now, this was around 2010 or 2009. So live chat was this incredibly new and exciting thing. And it was actually the first live chat team in the European energy industry, you know, so it was this kind of pilot scheme. And from that, I kind of started to get interested in marketing and SEO. And actually the success of that sales team I was managing very much came down to how many people were on the website. So from this, I suddenly...
Something went off in your head, a light bulb
Something went off, and it was like, the internet, you know, this is happening. This is so cool. And I just saw this opportunity. And it was at that time that I felt like I'd done my time in the energy industry. And I left EDF in, I think, 2012 or 2011, and I moved in with my brother to limit my costs at the time. Thanks to him for putting up with me. And I went back to college, and I went to a very small media college in Brighton called Hove College, and I did an advanced diploma in digital design. And that covered a range of different skills from journalism, PR, digital marketing, web design, graphic design, a bit of photography. You know, it was a really broad course, not particularly specific.
I wonder if that course actually came about, you know, it probably wasn't around so much before 2007 when you started EDF. I mean, 2007 is when the first iPhone came out, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So, and what was interesting actually was that was the first time in my life that I'd been in an educational setting, and had actually been happy to be there, essentially. It was an incredibly flexible curriculum, and I was essentially a mature student at that time. I was surrounded by what seemed to me like teenagers.
How old were you at the time?
I would have been I guess I would have been 30 or late 20s.
Okay, yeah.
And as I say, but before that, I'd not done any kind of design or anything like that. But this really interesting thing happened around that time. So I started studying, and I started to talk to people about what I was doing, and immediately people started coming out of the woodwork saying, oh, you do that? Oh, can you do me a website, or can you design me something? And it was at this time that someone reached out to me from a bottled water company called Life Water, which I believe is where our paths would have first crossed, Sean.
I think they might have, yes, indeed.
So I was invited to go there as a kind of freelancer, and ended up kind of managing their entire brand, all of their marketing output, from packaging design, which I'd never even touched on or anything like that. And as I started to do work, more and more sort of freelance work started to crop up, until I had a relatively healthy kind of portfolio of freelance web design and print design work. And I'd actually, as I was coming to my graduation at college, I'd started to apply to different agencies, thinking that this was the route. I wanted to get the qualification and go into an agency setting. And I didn't have very much luck at all.
Why do you think that was?
I don't know. I think it's because I was slightly older than some of the sort of fresh graduates that were looking for work in that field. I think I was slightly late to the game. And I think I was a bit of a jack of all trades. It was hard to kind of pinpoint what my, exact expertise was at that time. I was doing lots of different types of work, and perhaps not specialising in a particular field, which, to be honest, Sean, is still kind of still true to a certain extent now, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But I think to certain employers, it meant they struggled to kind of place me to a certain extent. So at that point, it was tricky, and it kind of got me down a little bit. But I kind of had this work with Life Water at the time, and I had a bit of a freelance kind of portfolio that kind of kept me ticking over. So I thought, well, that's it then. I'm freelancing essentially, and that was difficult. I was never earning a huge amount. I was getting by, and I was loving what I was doing and constantly learning. But then out of the blue, at one of the agencies that I'd contacted and not had any luck with, got in touch with me out of the blue to say they now actually had a position and wanted to talk to me. And that was Liquid Light, where I'm still working
where you
for
still
now.
are as a senior designer now, right?
Senior designer now, yeah. So I started at Liquid Light just over 5 years ago as a junior. Never having worked in an agency before, and I'm incredibly grateful to Liquid Light for the opportunities they've provided me. I went into that. They could tell that I was someone who was able to string a conversation together, to manage a relationship with a client and manage my own workload because perhaps partly because of my age and previous managerial experience, and partly because of just kind of the sort of person that I am. So they really threw me in at the deep end. So even though I was a junior designer by name, week one in the job, I was sort of with support managing kind of quite large scale web projects.
Well, you already had that grounding, didn't you?
Yeah.
You already had that grounding. So that EDF energy, where it wasn't perhaps stretching your creative skills, it was giving you a foundation of management skills that you actually could take to your creative jobs, and be this sort of not an all-rounder in terms of the jack of all trades thing, but very specific management skills and very specific creative skills. Yeah,
exactly. And Liquid Light is, the only agency I've worked at, so I don't know how unique this is, but certainly Liquid Light is a small enough organisation that they really do harbour the kind of skills that different individuals bring to the table. So they're very open to, if you have a particular interest, then they're very open to you taking a bit of time to explore that and see what you can do with it and how that could potentially grow into something that could create work for the agency and obviously mainly help our clients in some way.
A Google time. I've heard that Google do that, don't they? They give you that space where you can have a few hours to yourself and come up with those ideas that may help the company in the future. It's forward thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
So in terms of being creative, you're quite prolific. I mean, as well as being a designer, freelance and employed by an agency, you actually have 6,000 subscribers on your own YouTube channel, which is, it's not quite Marcus Brownlee territory, but we have to start somewhere, don't we? So how long have you actually been a YouTuber?
So just under 3 years since my first upload. Steadily growing. Still small, but I feel like it's quite an exciting time for the channel at the moment. The level of growth that's happening is just getting to the point where people are starting to pay attention. And when I say that, I mean like I'm kind of like manufacturers are starting to sort of have some interest in the channel now, which is great because I get some toys to play with and talk about on the channel. And I think, there's that snowball effect with this kind of thing where I think people watch a video and if you've not got many subscribers, they're perhaps slightly more hesitant to subscribe themselves.
Yeah.
So it feels like, that snowball effect is slowly taking shape, which is really nice.
The snowball effect leads to the tipping point. There will be a tipping point one day, won't there? Where let's suddenly just go, hey, overnight, what happened? How have I doubled my subscribers overnight?
Exactly.
Yeah. So in terms of what you're actually offering as a YouTuber, I mean, I found you through comparing Rode microphones, for instance, because I was in
yes.
that, and then I went through your history, and you're quite right. We may have crossed paths without knowing it when you were at Lifewater, because I was in that industry at the time as well. But in terms of what you're offering as a YouTuber, if we could go back to your first initial videos and the way you've styled them and the content that you're producing nearly 3 years on now, I think you said, how have you changed that and what you think gets more hits than others?
Oh, that's a good question, Sean.
Can I feed you a little more on that? I've noticed that your most successful videos are about Final Cut Pro, for instance.
Yes, absolutely. So it's an interesting one. So the channel came about in quite an interesting way in that I bought my first camera about a year before, maybe less than a year before I started the YouTube channel. And the idea was that as a designer, I quite often felt like, if I just had a decent camera, might be able to take some shots of like products or print work, it might be helpful. But also, I felt like it might be a nice way to get away from the screen for a bit and do something. And I felt like it was a nice hobby that I could pick up that's still on the fringes of design. Learning about color and composition is slightly different to web design or print design, for example.
Yes. Yeah.
So it felt like something that was could be a nice hobby, but would also feed into my career. And I used to talk to my partner, Elise, about cameras and equipment and geek out on it. And she used to say, yeah, this is really great, Will, and you're talking really passionately about this, but I don't know what you're talking about or really care. Have you thought about setting up a YouTube channel? Because you're really good at this chatting, but I just don't think I'm your audience. And and obviously that was like, haha, very funny. Yeah, carry on. And then actually one of my colleagues and a good friend of mine at Liquid Light, he used to joke that when I get into something, anything, whatever it might be, the flavor of the week, when I get into something, I really get into it and I go deep. And he used to say, you should have a YouTube channel and just talk about whatever it is you're into at the moment. And so eventually the combination of those two people really kind of prompted me to think maybe this is a cool idea. But for me, there was another motivation to setting up the YouTube channel, which was I wanted something to hold me accountable and something to give me a cause to create that wasn't a client project. And I think when my first video, which, God, sort of feel like I've come a long way since then. I was sort of saying, I don't really know what I'm going to talk about, but I've got a camera. I don't really know what I'm doing with it. And I kind of want to learn more about photography and filmmaking. And I'm going to just share that journey as I go along. And that kind of essence, that ethos, is something that very much stays true now. I'm not trying to come across as an expert. I'm just someone who's going through the motions, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. And that's kind of that's what I always try and do. That, I don't want to preach I know all of this stuff, because I don't. It might look a bit like I know what I'm talking about, but I'm very much just finding my feet as I go along. And if I figure something out, then I can share that. And so I started off, I always knew I wanted to do some kind of product reviews, because I just love equipment. I like talking about, the gear that we use to take photos and create videos.
You're
I
a
get
tech
a kick
nerd
out of that.
like me. I understand.
Exactly. And then, the tutorials kind of came naturally as kind of the next step from that. But I never really imagined that the tutorials would kick off like they have. And now I find myself trying to kind of, I think I watched as well. I watched a lot of kind of vlog style videos on YouTube, like Casey Neistat and Peter McKinnon, where to a certain extent they are, people watch those videos because of those characters. They're almost, celebrity in their fields. So I'd started doing that very early on, and those videos tanked because who the hell am I? No one knows who I am. So then I very quickly realized that actually I just need to focus on providing value to people. And maybe if I grow an audience by creating value, then perhaps one day people will be more interested in the details of my life or whatever, and I can relax,
I think so. People didn't know who Peter McKinnon was at first, and he had that tipping point very quickly, I think, didn't he? But at first, I mean, even he would admit that, those first rudimentary videos that he created are not as nearly as polished as they are now. But he's great at taking people on that journey. He's fun. He's got enthusiasm, so that he can, if he wants to, he can do a tutorial, but he can also show you B-roll making coffee, and that's a part of what people like, I guess.
Yeah, he was a massive inspiration actually for me. I was watching his videos before I set up my YouTube channel, and he had just such a nice attitude, this kind of anyone can do this, can do kind of attitude, and for me, my all of the knowledge I have that I've gathered, which is constantly growing, is all self-taught. And the majority of that information has come from YouTube. I've just watched hours and hours of YouTube videos. So part of it for me was like, I've learned so much. Maybe there's something I can kind of give back in a way, just by, sitting in my office at home and talking through the things that I'm doing. So yeah, that's a really round robin kind of response to your question. I hope it kind of touches on it a bit. And, just to add to it, like moving forward, yes, I want to do more tutorials because they're really popular and I think people get real value from them. And it's something that I enjoy doing. I love equipment, so I'm always going to be talking about the new toys that I pick up and why I'm using them and what that is. And I'd also like to do more kind of photography based tutorials as well, because I will go out with my camera, and at the moment there's this kind of feeling that going out with my camera is kind of this nice escape, but actually there's some things that I might play with while I'm out that could still have value, and I think that might be a nice sort of growth of the channel to do a bit more of that. But yeah, time is the enemy, Sean.
Oh, it always is. It always is. And let's come to that, actually, I think many people think the life of a videographer, especially putting YouTube videos together, is easy until they try it. A lot of work goes into it. And you see a lot of burnout videos from even the big YouTubers, don't you? I mean, the amount of labour that goes into it. I mean, what about you? Is it one of the most time-consuming parts of your creative life?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I work full time, so 9 to 6, I'm generally in the office and working on web design projects. So all of my YouTube stuff happens evenings and weekends, which in itself is a struggle. My freelance work outside of YouTube, I've actually kind of started to slowly turn it off a little bit and be very selective about the freelance projects that I take on, because if a project will feed me content for the YouTube channel, then that's great, and I want to do it. But some of the projects are kind of good money, but they just take away the time that I can spend on my own creative outlets. So there's a balance to it. When I started the YouTube channel, my plan was to do weekly uploads, and I think I did weekly uploads for about 10 or 11 weeks, and then it was
exhausting.
And then it was exhausting, and life gets in the way. And I've kind of had these stints where I kind of hit YouTube quite hard and stick to weekly uploads, and then maybe I'll have a few months where I don't upload because of one reason or another. So on kind of average, I've kind of averaged fortnightly videos over 3 years, and last year maybe I didn't even quite hit that. I was moving house, so there was a lot to get in the way. But yeah, it is really challenging. And it's something that I'm getting better at, actually, because I've kind of recently got into kind of trying to batch record videos. So instead of, I used to kind of sit down on a Saturday morning, outline a video, set it up, record it, export the footage, edit it, and essentially try and do a video in a day. For something like a tutorial. Of other videos where I'm maybe out and about, they can take much longer and spread over a much longer period of time. But now I've realised that actually, if I'm setting everything up, it's better to spend a few evenings outlining a few videos, and then on a Saturday set up and try and record like 2, 3, 4 videos in one day while the equipment's up and while I've got that momentum, and then slowly edit and release those videos over the coming weeks.
That's the sort of wisdom I think that many people need to hear before they make that mistake too, where you put all of your eggs in one basket and really hone that one thing when you could actually split the content into many different bits. But let's change track a little bit, because I want to come back to your design a little bit. So can you actually describe what your design philosophy or style actually is?
So my design style is quite bold, quite in your face, and quite loud. But they're all kind of visual descriptors. But I would say my philosophy, and this definitely comes from kind of working more specifically in the web world. My philosophy to all my creative outlets is probably done is better than perfect. Mm-hmm. Get it done, get it out, and then iterate. And it's kind of, I see it as a constantly evolving process rather than this perfect launch. And I think that is something that a lot of people think that they have to be striving for perfection, and constantly finessing. Yeah, we have a phrase in our agency which is death by 1,000 cuts, which is just keep going and going and going and going and going, and we'll put it live after this. We'll put it live after this, and actually, it's recognizing that there's no such thing as perfect. And as well, I want to clarify as well that I'm not saying that we put subpar work out. It's more the fact that what is perfection, and you have to look at it incrementally. Whereas if you have a project that's going on, and I've had personal, video projects which have dragged because I'm never quite happy with it. And it's a case of, well, actually, where this is right now, whilst it might not be that vision of perfect that's in my head, it's still so much better than what's currently there or what's currently available.
Yes.
Or, the current website that this new one is going to replace. And I think that's a really important kind of philosophy that I try and carry is to try and remain kind of humble and pragmatic about what something's going to achieve. And no, obviously with print design, it's a bit different, but with web design, it's never perfect. It's always going to be moving. It's a moving target, essentially.
The business side of design is to actually remember that I can't just draw and draw and draw. So, I'm being simplistic here. There has to be a deadline for when I stop drawing, and then just put it out there and let someone see my drawing. That kind of philosophy. You have to have that business sense, otherwise you just keep going.
Yeah, actually, Sean, that's one of the things I really found quite challenging when I went from just freelancing to being in an agency environment was that kind of that need to sort of turn it on. And I used to sit at my laptop at home when I was freelancing and say, nah, it's not happening right now. And then at 11 o'clock at night, I'd say, ding, right, I've got it. And I would rush to my laptop and churn something out quickly. And then suddenly I was in an agency environment, working sort of 9 to 6. And it would be like, right, you've got an hour. Can we just get a few options on that thing? And I'd be like, but I'm not, I'm not feeling it right now. And it's like, oh yeah, you actually have to, you have to be able to kind of work at pace and kind of, grind it out sometimes when you're not feeling like it.
Yeah, the difference between being an artist and an actual working designer or a copywriter. I had the same thing when I've done a lot of copywriting for agencies in the past. And there is that thing where they come to you, right, we're going to sit down for an hour and we need 3 different advertising concepts. Go and work with a designer. I'll see you in an hour. And you think,
exactly.
I've got to turn it on. And I guess that's part of the learning experience as well, is that you're not just honing your skills as a designer or copywriter, wherever you do, you're honing your efficiency. You're honing your way of approaching each project.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a typographic quote that I must have seen 1 million times on Instagram, which is, make something today, even if it's crap. And for me, that's kind of like, the amount of times I've sat at a blank document thinking, I don't know. I don't know where to start. And you just have to sort of say, well, I'm going to start. And you just throw something there and you say, well, that's rubbish, but I can now identify what's rubbish about it and I can tweak it and I can move forward with that. And, that's given me another idea. I'll explore that now for a few minutes. And, wait a minute, that's given me another idea. And that's very much how I find that process goes, is just get something on the page.
Yeah, it's my Instagram intro, to be honest. Yeah, do something creative every day. So how do you think design has changed over the last few years then, especially since you graduated from college? I mean, perhaps bring business into your answer here. So what are the expectations of designers from new clients, for instance?
I think it's really interesting. I think the whole of the kind of web design world specifically has become much more commoditized than it used to be. Liquid Light, for example, has been around for 25 years. They were a digital agency before websites, really. They were doing CD-ROM discs. So if you wanted a website, you would go to an agency. Whereas now, the whole industry is so commoditized that we've got the likes of Squarespace and Wix, WordPress, and the theme builders that come with those tools, like Divi and Elementor and stuff.
I use
like
Elementor myself. Yeah.
I noticed, actually. I checked your website out. And what that means is there's a majority of people, individuals, freelancers, and small to medium-sized businesses, which perhaps aren't looking to agencies anymore in the same way to produce their websites. They're either taking it in-house or they are able to use freelancers, which are, don't carry the same overheads of an agency like Liquid Light. And so we've found that we need to be much more dynamic in our approach to what we can deliver. We are constantly looking for ways that we can add value to our offering. And one of the main ways that we've done that at Liquid Light is we talk a huge amount with our clients now about their kind of messaging, defining their tone and their brand language and how they can create successful campaigns with their websites. And we're lucky that a lot of our clients that we work with actually come on to stay with us as an ongoing relationship, to work with them. And that means that we can look at kind of content creation, which is where, me picking up a camera 4 years ago has now started to bleed into my work at Liquid Light. And we're kind of doing video production work now as an agency, and general content creation, like, producing podcasts and stuff like that. So we're constantly looking for, like, our view at Liquid Light is it's not enough anymore just to be able to build a nice looking website. Actually, you've got to be able to justify how that website is delivering for a business, how it can continue to deliver, and always looking for new ways to add value to that client.
Yeah. Well, you specialise in branding too. You just mentioned it then. Is it actually rare to find people with design and branding as core skills?
I don't think it's that rare now. I think that's one of the ways in which design has changed a bit over the years. You know, when I came out of college, it was very much that you had branding agencies and you had sort of web agencies and advertising agencies. Whereas, and you know, as I've already said, our sort of heritage comes very much from being a web design agency. But actually, it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, really, Sean, because we have a lot of people approach us at Liquid Light and they say, we've got brand guidelines, we want a website. And we look at those brand guidelines and they just don't translate to the web. So there's this whole question of like, first of all, are you happy with these brand guidelines? Second of all, you've told us what you want the website to do. Do you think your brand guidelines are supporting your goals? And third of all, we need to evolve these guidelines in order to work online on the internet in an accessible way that's usable and provides a good user experience. So we often start from a place of like, we start a project with a client saying, I've got my brand guidelines, I just need you to build a website. And the next thing we're sort of saying, well, look, we can really help you define your brand a little bit better. And as a result of
challenging the brief. Yeah.
Exactly. And so quite often people say, oh, well, I know what I want. I just use my brand guidelines. And we will purposefully show them something quite different and say, well, are you sure? Here's an option. Here's some food for thought. And quite often the case is, oh, yeah, no, actually, I do want that. So it's an interesting one. But yeah, I think that's definitely a way in which design has changed.
Well, sadly, we need to wrap this up. But what I like to ask my guests at the end is, if you can, don't give any secrets away. But what are you working on at the moment? And what advice would you give to young people listening to this who are also about to graduate or they're going through their own learning at the moment and hoping to create a career as a creative?
My main projects at Liquid Light are kind of ongoing. I'm working with a couple of NGOs at the moment, redeveloping their websites. That's all I'll say on that because they're in progress. My personal projects very much just focusing on trying to get to try and produce as much YouTube content as I can because I just love doing it and I love talking to my subscribers and seeing that I'm helping people in that way with that. I've also got a slight idea for a kind of mini web-based series where I sort of want to interview and do kind of mini documentary series about creatives and visit some different creatives and sort of do a small web series. So that's kind of in the pipeline, but it's kind of on hold at the moment because of everything that's going on, unfortunately. But
well, it's what the show is about, actually, and you have my support. I will definitely share everything that you create. It's a fascinating subject.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no
and then finally, advice to someone starting out. I think the best thing, I don't remember if someone told me this or whether I came to this conclusion on my own, but there was a light bulb moment for me when I realized that I didn't need permission from anybody to do creative things, or I didn't need any external validation to say what I was doing was good enough, or that I would, that I could call myself whatever the thing was. So, for example, there was a period of time when I was studying where I would say, if someone asked me what I was doing, I would say I was learning web design. And people would say, well, that's nice. And eventually I realized, wait a minute, no, I'm a web designer. And if I introduce myself as a web designer, then suddenly people were like, oh, cool, I need a website. Can you help me with that? And I would say, yeah. So for me, there's I think this comes from a bit of imposter syndrome on my part, but there was this kind of need for some sort of external validation. Like, oh, I've graduated. Someone's told me I can do this thing now. But actually that made zero difference. It was more of an internal recognition that, no, I don't need to be given permission or told that I'm qualified or capable. I just need to say, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I'm passionate about, and this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to do it.
Great advice. Really good advice, yeah. And how do we contact you, Will?
Probably the best way to contact me is either through my YouTube channel, or on Instagram. I'm quite active on Instagram, so drop me a DM on Instagram is a good way. And you can find my email address if you prefer. You can find that through my YouTube channel as well.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again for joining me today, for imparting your creative wisdom. And I hope you're managing in this isolated period of coronavirus.
Yes, indeed. Thanks so much for having me, Sean. It's been a pleasure.
That was Will Chidlow, and you can find him online at willchidlow.com or on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Vimeo, LinkedIn, and his favourite Instagram. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever podcast service you subscribe to. It means a lot to the success of the show if you rate it. I'd really appreciate it. You can take a look at my own website at seanweston.co.uk for more information about me. In the meantime, stay tuned. There's more to come.